Afrika Tuungane is here to offer a bold and decisive solution to Africa's greatest challenge, the challenge of African unity. A solution which, when implemented, shall give the much-needed impetus in solving the problems of intra-African travel, intra-African trade, intra-African tourism, and well, to any other problem and challenge that has been arising from the continued disunity of Africa, African states, and Africans. Afrika Tuungane proposes the promotion of one African language to become a common language and lingua franca for all Africans. This shall remedy the problem and challenge of discordant African communication, which is a major obstacle to African unity. Afrika Tuungane hereby petitions the African Union Assembly of Heads of State and Government to unite Africans through one common African language and lingua franca. How? By introducing Kiswahili language in primary, secondary, and even tertiary education across Africa by the year 2033, or in this decade of acceleration. It is untenable and counterproductive for Africa and the African Union to continue envisioning and working towards African unity while Africans remain and continue to be segregated and disconnected from each other through discordant and alienating colonial languages and speech communities. English, Anglophone; French, Francophone; Arabic, Arabophone; Spanish, Hispanophone; and Portuguese, Lusophone. These are colonial languages and speech communities imposed on Africans by former colonial powers to divide and segregate Africans in order to propagate colonialism during the colonial era and neocolonialism to date. Nothing can connect and unite people faster and easier than a common language. Language and communication are basic, the first and most important means of establishing identity, contact, connection, interaction, trust, relation, and understanding between and among human beings. Indeed, this has not and cannot be achieved in Africa as long as we Africans remain disconnected and divided by colonial languages and linguistic imperialism imposed on us through colonialism. This petition is determined to advocate Kiswahili to become the ultimate common language and lingua franca for all Africans in Africa. This goal will be achieved by introducing Kiswahili language as a subject in primary, secondary, and even tertiary education curriculums across Africa by the year 2033. Year 2033 will mark the end of Africa's decade of acceleration, or the second 10-year implementation plan of Africa's Agenda 2063. Kiswahili is an indigenous African language which was recently adopted as an official language of the African Union alongside 5 colonial languages, that is English, French, Spanish, Portuguese, and Arabic. Article 25 of the Constitutive Act of the African Union, the act upon which the African Union is established, states that, and I quote, "The working languages of the Union and all its institutions shall be, if possible, African languages." Key objectives of the African Union, according to this very act, is to, and I quote, "promote and defend African common positions on issues of interest to the continent and its peoples." And another objective, quote, "achieve greater unity and solidarity between the African countries and the peoples of Africa." Kiswahili is an African language, and by extension an African common position by virtue of being the only official African Union language that is African. Africa is home to nearly 3,000 different languages, and therefore the need for a common language and lingua franca for Africa and Africans is indeed and evidently an issue of great interest and urgency for Africans and Africa. The greater unity and solidarity between the over 1.5 billion Africans across 55 African states, as envisaged in the Act, cannot be achieved without a common language and, by extension, an African lingua franca. Therefore, dear fellow Africans, promoting and advocating for the only African Union official language that is African to become a common language and lingua franca for all Africans is a feasible and strategic decision for the African Union to make. An African lingua franca will create an African speech community and linguistic unity, and practically spur African integration, coexistence, belonging, unity, collaboration, and synergy, the much needed impetus towards actualizing the aspirations and objectives of Agenda 2063. Lugha ya Kiswahili na iwe nguzo ya mawasiliano, maelewano, utangamano, umoja, nguvu, uwiano, undugu, mshikamano na mafanikio ya Waafrika wote barani Afrika.